Hi, Jeremy Crow here. In this video, we're going to pull back the curtain and look beyond the veil of death. Well, not really. But it sounds a lot more dramatic and exciting when I say it that way, doesn't it? Now, if anybody tells you that they know definitively this is exactly what happens when you die, they're either themselves deluded, they're outright lying to you, or they're trying to sell you something, maybe even a belief system, or some combination of those three. I'm not going to do that in this video, but what I am going to do is I'm going to take a bunch of the different components from various different world mythologies, religions, and spiritual systems in general throughout the ages, and there's a bunch of them that really seem to work well with each other, and it creates a very interesting, coherent, possible afterlife scenario. And that's what I'm going to tell you about now. Here's a bonus afterlife scenario that's potentially real. Maybe nothing. Maybe you die and that's the end of it. Oblivion. So there's your bonus possible afterlife story. So there's a couple different variants that I'm going to have in this video. That's one of them. Now the other one that I'm going to tell you about is a little bit more elaborate than that. So let's just start off with what death is to begin with. We keep pushing this definition of death further and further. Really, it's a legal definition. And if we even go back like 150 years, that's not that long ago. If you were to drop dead of a heart attack in the street, and if somebody came and started giving you heart palpitations or heart compressions, chest compressions, that's the word I'm looking for, chest compressions, that person would be carted off to jail and charged with molestation of a corpse because they thought his heart stopped, you're dead, right? But now we know that you can be revived from a heart attack. Like, not always, but often you can. And we keep, like I said, we keep pushing this further and further back. So rather than get into some sort of sticky situation trying to figure out where that point is, I'm just going to say death, for the purposes of this video, is a convenient term for when the physical body stops working. So what happens? Well, if we look at both Gnostic thought, and Gnosticism is not exactly a specific tradition, it's more of a way of thinking, because there have been Gnostic variants of several different traditions, world traditions, that have existed throughout the ages. But one of the common things about that is that you have this idea that the universe, the world of experience, is a type of, you could call it a collective fractal hologram, and that it's like a type of prison, actually, where we are limited, and that there is often in these concepts some sort of vampiric entity that is keeping us trapped in this hologram and utilizing us as a resource, kind of like that they think of us almost like their property or their cattle, in a sense. And I'm going to refer to that entity as Enlil from the ancient Sumerian mythology. This entity has various different names in different traditions. Often within Gnosticism, you'll hear people refer to it as the demiurge. Now, you have this very similar concept within Buddhist thought. And in Buddhism, you have this idea of samsara, where it's this cycle of rebirth. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. I meant to say the concept of Maya, where this entire existence is an illusion, right? And that we are stuck in it. That is that cycle of rebirth called samsara. And if you talk about this in Gnostic terms, you have Enlil being, like I said, owning us like it's cattle and using us for resources. Now, if you look at some of the really old myths, like from ancient Sumer and Babylon and such, you'll see that often it's the natural resources of the earth, and in particular, the metals of the earth, that the humans were made to mine these metal ores and refine them for Enlil's use. But I think that might be a metaphor. You know, gold and silver and all these different things are very symbolic in nature. But putting that aside, let's just say that the demiurge, it's using us for resources, and I believe those resources to be things like emotions and various different energies that we produce when we are put in this limited state in a box, in a Saturnian cube, you could say. For the various different people who know these symbols, I'm throwing these in there. We're in this Saturnian cube, limited, and that produces certain energies when we are in that, experiencing it, especially when we're caught up in it. We produce the most intense energies that this demiurge will feed on, in a sense. And so it wants to keep us in this hologram, in this fractal hologram. And so what happens is, when you die, it takes your essence or your soul and it recycles it back into the matrix, back into the Saturnian cube. It traps us back in there, and we keep going back over and over, and we keep going through this, producing these intense energies for the demiurge to feed on. Now, you don't have that quite so much in terms of an entity, a vampiric entity that's using us for resources as much in Buddhism, but you do have this concept that we are in this illusion and that we're trapped in it, and that we keep getting tricked, in a sense, into coming back again. And so let's dig into a little bit more of the mechanics behind what actually is happening when you die. So we can look at alchemy, and I'm looking at Eastern and Western alchemy here when I'm talking about this. Specifically, the most pertinent forms of alchemy that I'm going to be talking about here would be the dream alchemy of Tibetan Buddhism and Bon shamanism, the internal alchemy of Taoism, and the Hermetic alchemy of Western Hermeticism, and the writings of Hermes, etc. So what we have here is that they talk about the fact that the things that are on one plane of existence can inform us and teach us about things that are on another plane of existence. Although they do have separate, different rules for each, but we can learn something about the others because there is some mirroring, some microcosmic, macrocosmic, as above, so below kind of mirroring that happens. And so we can learn about one by examining the other. Now, what happens to the physical body when it stops working? Well, the bonds between the various different components start to break down. And eventually, all the different components go off and get reused to make new physical bodies. Not necessarily human our bodies get used to make other bodies that are vegetative, fungal, and mammalian, animal life in general. All the various different, it gets reused for all kinds of stuff. So it's not necessarily the straight one-to-one kind of one body dies and another body is created of the same type. No, it's all connected. It's all part of a big cycle, an ecosystem. And so what happens when we die on the more subtle realms? So let's call the part of ourselves that is unique to the individual as their soul. So this is a subtle body, you could say. And what happens to it? Well, the same basic thing. The different components or fragments break down. The bonds between those components break down, and they get dispersed and then reused to make other subtle bodies. Now, within alchemy, you have this idea that if you can take these components and separate them before death and purify each of them individually and then recombine them again, then that is what's referred to as the Philosopher's Stone, or the diamond body, or the rainbow body sometimes. And this is a complete harmonized self, in a sense. That's a term that I came up with to kind of describe it for in more common words. But essentially, you have combined them and bound them together, and they are working in such harmonious union that they have now essentially become one, a monad, in a sense. Now that would be a perfect ascension, in a sense. You would have fully manifested your ascension body if you are able to alchemically unite all the various different components that make up you, that make up your soul. Now, there are some traditions, actually most of the traditions, that say that if you once you hit certain levels of unity within your own soul, that you can actually start incorporating less subtle bits, like physical stuff. And in Tibetan tradition, you even have this concept that at death, one of the signs of advanced attainment is that the body will shrink, and that sometimes rainbow colored lights will come off of the body. And this is the unified soul pulling part of the physical body with it. It's so unified. It's even some of the physical body has come with it too. And you'll even see in some of the old traditions like Elijah or Enoch. You have this concept that Enoch, he was taken by the gods and he walked with the gods, and he didn't taste death in the same way, where he's bodily in heaven, people say, as part of that tradition. And you see other ideas in the Catholic tradition. They say that Mary was assumed into heaven bodily when she was 72 years old. So there's a lot of symbolism there too. 72 being one of the angles in a pentagram, for example. 72 degrees. But anyways, I'm getting on a tangent here. So if you can achieve that level of coherence within the self, that you can avoid being broken down. You can avoid that decomposition of the soul. And now some people refer to that as the second death. that you will not have to taste the second death or experience the second death, because you have achieved such a high level of internal coherence and integrity in the truest sense of the word. Now, there's also the concept of a bodhisattva, where somebody who has achieved that level still can come back. Now, this is where we can come back to some Gnostic thought. Now, there is this idea within Gnosticism that it's a choice. Even within Buddhism, there's this concept of a choice that we, through our own actions, get caught back up into a physical body that entraps our essence that has so much more capability than we realize when we're trapped in this Saturnian cube. That we're trapped and we're limited and we forget our divine nature. And there's this really cool concept of this parable of what is it called? The pearl, the great pearl, or the pearl of great price. So this is talked about in Gnosticism, and I think in Mormonism as well. They even have this same or similar parable of the pearl of great price, where that we've forgotten our divine nature. But that's what Enlil wants. He wants us to forget that, because the more entrenched within this fractal hologram that we are, the more intense the energies that we're going to be producing for him to feed on, like I said. But let's say we do achieve this ascension level of coherence, and we're in this state. You can still choose to come back here. And there are some people called bodhisattvas that have vowed to always choose to come back here until everything can be liberated all at once, or that the entire hologram itself can be liberated. But if you look at the Gnostic version of that same thing, it's Enlil who's tricking you or convincing you that it's a good idea to go back in there. That, oh, look at how much good you could do if you go back. And so there's a bit of debate there, whether somebody who has achieved that level should go back. Now, there's also within Taoism the idea that if you liberate yourself from this cycle, this samsaric cycle of being recycled into the hologram for the use of Enlil, that you can liberate yourself from that, but now you have the ability to roam the subtle planes, the heavens, you could say, freely. You could create your own heaven, or you can choose to manifest a body of convenience in the Matrix. You can hack into the Matrix with your pirate signal and exist in there for a time, and then dissolve the body again at will. But only if you've liberated yourself from that cycle first. So that is a very interesting concept, and I think that Gnostics would agree with that idea, that that the idea is to first, if you can liberate yourself from that cycle, don't get tricked into just going back in. Liberate yourself from it, and then you have the ability, the power to go in at will if you want. So that really is where it all goes. But I want to get to this idea of the choice. I want to dig into that just a little bit more before I let you go. So the idea that there's a choice, but, now this is a big but. I like big butts. I cannot lie. Anyways, I'm getting distracted here. I'm getting caught up in the matrix. You may not have a conscious choice. If you are sleepwalking your way through life, you're in this reactive state where you are just experiencing stimulus and having a reaction to it. You're not actually freely choosing your actions at any given point. You are reacting instinctively. And a lot of people believe that they are making conscious choices, but there's a lot of science to say that when we've made a choice, or when we think that we've decided on something, that the choice is already made in our mind. That machines can detect that we've already made that decision before we've consciously realized that we've decided, and that when we say we've decided, that's us rationalizing the choice that's already been made instinctively and reactively. So this gets us into some of the dream alchemy stuff, the lucid dreaming stuff. Now, within Buddhism, you have this idea that if you want to know how you'll fare in that afterlife test, in a sense, to see whether you're going to be able to liberate yourself in that in-between state between one cycle of the Saturnian cube and the next, the bardo. When you're in that bardo and you're going to either be caught back up into it or be freed from it, that the choice is usually going to be just instinctually, you're just going to get caught back up into it. That it's almost like very similar to the process of when you fall asleep and dream. So the idea is that you lie down, or whatever, let's just assume you're going to sleep lying down. You lie down, your senses, your physical sense organs start shutting down, in a sense. The inputs from them get muted, and we're cut off from the physical senses. And without that anchor of experience being generated, our own internal hologram, because we have each have our own internal hologram which interfaces with the collective hologram. So that experience generator is not producing an experience, and then we fall into this bardo, this in-between state where we're not in a dream yet, and the waking experience has ended. That bardo there, we swoon. Our consciousness just is lost. We just lose consciousness. We're not often able to maintain consciousness without the anchor of an experience. But that's what's going to happen at death. When the physical body stops working, you're going to have that situation where you're not having an experience being generated from your sense organs. And then what happens is subtle energies start swirling, and you start noticing patterns, and you get caught up into it, and then you find yourself in this scenario. This dream develops. You find yourself in a dream when you fall asleep. Now, this is what happens in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that they describe this happens when you die as well. That these illusory images from the subtle realm moving around you will entrance you, and you'll get caught up into it. And now, a lot of the times, it's really funny actually, in the Tibetan tradition, often what really catches us is the energies that are generated when people are copulating, when people are having sex, and that we get drawn to that specifically, and that spirals us down into, and we get caught up into being conceived, and that traps us into that fertilized cell, and then we grow and we're in the cube again, you know. And that it just happens without us thinking. It happens as an instinctual kind of stimulus response, because we are not awake. We are sleepwalking through it. We are not in a lucid state. Now, if you have experienced lucid dreaming, you will realize that if you are in a dream and you are aware that it's a dream, that it's so freeing, because what now happens is that you are aware of the nature of the experience that you're having. You're like, oh, I'm in a dream. That's what all of this is around me. This is a form of Maya. This is, in a dream, it's your own personal Saturnian cube that you're in. One level of it, the subtle level of it, right? And you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm in my own dream. And you understand, at least on a higher level, you have a higher level of understanding of the nature of that experience, and therefore you have much more freedom to choose what you want to do, and you do not have to react to it in the same way as if you thought it was real. Because most of the time when we're in a non-lucid dream, the images that we're presented with, we just assume are genuine, real waking experiences, and we react to them as if they were. And that is not as free of a position to be in as if you were lucid in the dream. Now, so like I said, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition and Bon shamanism, they say if when you fall asleep and you dream, if you don't recognize the dream as Maya, as illusion, that that's the same thing that's going to happen when you die. That these swirlings of energies that you're experiencing, you're not going to realize the nature of them as part of the cube, and you're going to get sucked into it. You're going to get wrapped up in it and caught up in it, and that'll trap you. You get stuck into it. So you have to be able to get to the point where you're capable of making that decision consciously, because if you can't make that decision consciously, you're probably going to instinctually get caught up in it. You're going to think it's genuine. You're going to think that it's not part of the cube. You're not going to even understand the concept of the cube. You're just going to be like, oh, cool. I'm going to get caught up in it and think, and then now you're trapped. So that's the afterlife scenario that I wanted to present to you guys. That this existence, both on the physical level and subtle level, is all part of that collective fractal hologram, the cube, the matrix. And that when our physical bodies stop working, we enter into a more subtle level. And that subtle level, you have to recognize the nature of the illusion